All right, we're talking Jeff Lemire. So obviously the big news leading up to this was Black Hammer spinning out into its own, you're having other series coming out of it. For you as a creator, like why, how do you kind of like come to the decision that you needed to expand the series from like the main series and doing spin-off tie-ins?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always loved superhero comics and writing superhero comics. When I first came up with the idea for Black Hammer, it was a long time ago, actually, like around 2007 or something, when I was still just drawing my own indie comics, and I never thought I'd actually get a chance to do real, quote-unquote, superhero comics, you know? So this was, the idea for Black Hammer was to sort of take my love of all these different superheroes and come up with something a little more indie and a little more like what I was doing at the time. So it started off as a pretty small story, and I just, when I started working on it again in 2014 with Dean Ormston, the artist, I just really fell in love with the world and the characters, and so did Dean, and I had the main story that we're doing, the Black Hammer story proper, but I started to realize that there could be like a larger universe there where I could really tell any kind of story I wanted, any kind of superhero story I wanted on my own terms, and I kind of looked at things like what Kurt Busiek had done with Astro City, where he had sort of...
Kind of reminds me a lot of
I love that. I loved what he did there, where he created this giant universe that was all his own, where he could tell stories on his own terms and use the superhero genre to really tackle anything, you know. And it just seemed like I didn't need to limit myself to the one Black Hammer story, that I could kind of go off and make something much bigger, So yeah, that was the impetus for doing the spin-offs.
So with Black Hammer, I mean, obviously you're kind of riffing on a lot of the classic characters. It's very familiar characters at times, at least their backgrounds, and you can kind of see where the influence was. As a creator, like why'd you go that route as opposed to maybe creating things from scratch? And it feels like you're almost kind of like doing like a slight deconstruction of some of these characters that we've seen elsewhere, and these types. At the same time, you're doing your own spin with original takes on them too.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the origins of the project, where, like I said, it was me kind of originally writing a love letter to all the stuff I loved. So I had for instance, the character of Colonel Weird was like all the great like 50s DC sci-fi characters that I love, like Adam Strange and Captain Comet and all these guys, and so it really was just me not thinking I'd ever actually publish this, but just having fun and like kind of riffing off the stuff I loved, the characters I loved. So it really did come from that, and you could see that in these characters, right? And now 10 years later, or however long it's been since I kind of came up with a lot of the characters, I've of course written for Marvel and DC pretty extensively, and so I have a very different perspective now than I did when I started. So it's kind of, the book allows me to kind of still keep that original love of all these characters, but also kind of come at it from the other side now, where I've done that, and you kind of take them apart a bit and kind of take them apart and put them together a little differently and sort of explore different things with them.
So I mean, you have done work with DC and Marvel. Like, has that? I mean, if I remember right, in the back matter for Folly Trade, you said that this was all the way back to like Underwater Welders when you started working on this, or like before that, or just after. Yeah. So it's been like what, 10 years, something like that. Yeah. And you've obviously have like a hell of a career since then. You've worked with, as I said, Marvel and DC. Like, has that influenced the series at all? Like, have you changed kind of your outlook on the characters and the world, and like how you put it all together because of that?
Yeah, I did, but not really in a cynical way. It's not like it's not the kind of thing where I feel all frustrated and pissed off by the big corporate publishers, and now I'm going to get back at them and like deconstruct their characters. It's not anything like that. It's more just like I think I have a better sense of how superhero comics are written traditionally now than I did, and it's kind of easier for me to kind of take a step back now and kind of do it a little bit differently, than I would if I was writing those characters for one of those companies. It's hard to give a specific example of that, but yeah, it's not really a cynical deconstruction. It still is. I still see it as, I really do. It absolutely is. I love these characters. I love superheroes. I love what they say. I love what you can do with them, because you can do anything with them. I don't know if that answers your question, but
kind of. With the you can point to a lot of the characters and say, oh, this is kind of a riff on this character. Is there anyone that you haven't had a chance to kind of like tackle, or someone that you really want to like dive into and kind of do your own spin to it?
Well, I think that what you just said, that should have been my answer earlier of why I'm doing the spin-offs, right? Because there are so many different superhero archetypes that I love that I haven't got a chance to write at Marvel or DC, or that don't really fit into the Black Hammer story I'm doing, the regular series. So that's exactly what these spin-offs can be, where I don't want to spoil what's coming, but I have a number of them, a list of character types that I would love to do my take on this kind of a story or that kind of a character, so that's what these side series will actually be. Yeah.
So the other thing with Black Hammer I think that's really interesting is that you've got this kind of in the present story going on, and then you flash back to all this history of these characters as well, and it all feels very fleshed out. Like you clearly have kind of thought through kind of the quote unquote the golden age and silver age and all that. Do you have like a Bible out there where you've kind of worked out all this world and like major events and how things have kind of played out?
Yeah, I did, and it's really, there's already a basis for it because you just look at real comic book history, and that provides your basis, right? So, but yeah, I think one of the funnest things about the Sherlock Frankenstein miniseries is that it does focus on the villains and a bit on the character of Lucy, but the other big thing that series does is we'll get to see that entire history that you're alluding to from the 1920s through to the present, kind of unfold as you learn Sherlock's story. So you'll really get to see it fleshed out even more than you say, and you'll get to see each generation kind of one lead to the next, and get to see a lot of the side characters that maybe were hinted at in the main series. And so it's a lot of fun now where I really get to... Sherlock will really show the canvas of what the history of this universe was. And then, like we said, now I'll get to, after that, say if I want to do a Punisher type vigilante character, for instance, I'll now have the framework where that would fit and how to tie it into the bigger world, but still tell whatever story I want to tell.
So the other thing is with the series going through ages, it really feels like you're kind of doing your own spin on like this is the history of comics. Yeah. Golden Age, Silver Age, Modern Age, and all that. Are you making a statement at all about that, or is it more of just like this is the history and this is the way it's played out, and I'm just kind of riffing on that?
No history, just a love letter, really. I love comic book history. There's nothing I love reading about more than comic book history, and I love every era for what it was, So it's not a comment or a deconstruction so much as just a celebration, but through my own voice, my own style, and the artists I'm working with.
So to change topics a little bit, so you did Justice League United, and there's also Roughneck. And the two things that really stuck out to me about those is you're putting First Nations in both of those. Roughneck especially, like the way I read it, was a really discussion of First Nations and how they kind of been treated in Canadian history, and where they are right now. And think about it as like mainstream creators, I can't think of anyone else that's really kind of taken that up or discusses that at all. So where does your interest in that to come from, and how involved are you in kind of like the First Nation advocacy and what's going on with Canada and changes since then in there?
Yeah, it is something I'm very, very engaged in. Trying to go back and answer your questions in order. Around 2014 or somewhere around there, I kind of got really into a couple of different Indigenous Canadian authors and their work, and through that I kind of realized how ignorant I was to First Nation culture, Indigenous culture in Canada. And I had done these books previously, like Essex County and things that were set in Canada and told the Canadian story, and I was kind of celebrated for it back home a little bit, but I started to realize they really just showed one aspect, almost in some ways a romanticized version of what Canada is, and there was this whole other side of our history and culture and that I didn't know a lot about. I wasn't taught about it in school as a kid, and I kind of grew up ignorant to a lot of these things. So one of those personal goals I had was just to learn more about Indigenous culture and try to educate myself. And as you're doing that, of course, you get these different projects like Justice League or whatever, and you're like, oh, well, I can use some of the stuff I'm learning about and reading about and try to create this character of Equinox or whatever. And then I spent some time traveling up north to a couple northern communities and hanging out in the schools with the kids and talking about comics and stuff. And And through that, the ideas for Roughneck started to form. So one thing kind of leads to the next, and I'm not sure. The other part of the other part of the question was how active I am in that. I have to be, as much as I want to educate myself about this stuff, I want to do stories about this stuff. There's also, you have to be very careful because I'm not Indigenous, and these aren't my stories to tell. So I don't want to do anything that's not authentic. It's not from my own experiences. So I'm not sure. I don't want to claim to be a spokesman for them or anything like that. So you have to kind of walk a fine line of doing that kind of thing. But I'm pretty active now I did a project last year that probably wasn't as widely known here in the States, but it's called The Secret Path. I did it with a Canadian musician named Gord Downey. Are you Canadian?
I'm from Buffalo.
Okay. That explains why you know all this.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty big deal in Canada. It was a story about residential schools in Canada, sort of a systematic rounding up of Indigenous kids throughout Canada's history, and sort of, trying to, what they said at the time was to rip the Indian out of them, just trying to destroy their culture through their kids. And so Gord had written 10 songs about that, about a boy named Channy Wenjack, who in the 1960s, he ran away from one of these communities and died when he was trying to walk home to his family. And Gord had been really touched by this story of this boy and wrote 10 songs, and he asked me to create a graphic novel based on the songs, and we did. And through that we were able to raise a lot of money for charity, for Indigenous charities and stuff. So that was kind of my way of trying to, I kind of took a lot from their culture to tell those stories that I told. So that was hopefully my way of giving something back.
Yeah. The reason it stands out is that Roughneck really I thought was like super layered, and I read it as you kind of go through a lot of the history and the abuse towards it, and then you had The Secret Path going out this around the same time that got released. So all coming out at the same time, I'm like, this feels like someone who really cares about this issue, or is at least kind of aware of the issue more than.
It was that was a period where between 2013, I guess it was more like 2012 to 2015, 16, where I was. Justice League United, Roughneck, and then Secret Path all kind of came at the same time, and it just was something I was just very engaged in for that 3-year window, and then these 3 projects all kind of came out of it. So it is something I'm very passionate about, and.
So with you've done a lot of indie work, you've done more, we'll say, mainstream work. For you as a creator, what's the difference between kind of doing the two? Is there a difference in your process? Is there a way you're thinking about things? Is there really anything that stands out to you as kind of the big difference for those who might not know?
Well, I always feel like I kind of have 3 careers right now at the same time, where there's always something I'm writing and drawing myself, and then there's stuff that creator-owned stuff that I'm writing for other artists like Descender and Black Hammer, and then I'll do some mainstream stuff. And so all the 3 of those things are very different. The stuff you're writing and drawing yourself, obviously you have complete control. It's very intimate, personal, and then that kind of carries over into things like Black Hammer and Descender, where there's not as much editorial interaction, just by the nature of the fact that it's your own world, your own universe. So you just have more freedom, and but then there's doing stuff for DC or whatever. There is a lot more interaction, a lot more collaboration and stuff. But there are advantages to that too. You get to work in a shared universe and work with other creators, and so each thing kind of has its draw. I'm kind of lucky where I have the kind of career where I don't have to choose any one of those paths, and I've been able to kind of do all 3 and balance them. So
yeah, I think there's the other kind of thing to say out is, you are probably one of the most prolific creators right now. It just feels like you've got tons coming out, which isn't a bad thing. It's awesome because I'm a huge fan. But the other thing that's interesting is it's all very different. Black Hammer is different than Descender, is different than graphic novels that you're putting out, is different than stuff you might be doing for DC and Marvel. I think you're one of the few that seems to really change things up a lot, where you might have 4 or 5 things out in a month. None of them are the same. For you as a creator, how does that feel to be able to do that? And is there challenges that are kind of posed by that?
No, it's not challenges. I think that's the only reason I'm able to do so much stuff is that everything's so different, and that I never burn out because I can work on Royal City one day, and then I can work on Bloodshot the next day, and they couldn't be more different from one another, and you kind of refresh yourself, and you stay fresh. If I was just telling the same type of story and putting out that many books a month, I think readers would be sick of it and sick of me, and I would be sick of doing it, so I just the only way I'm able to kind of do so much stuff is if I'm exploring different things in each one and kind of staying fresh. So, yeah.
Even though they're different, I feel there's almost kind of like a somewhat universal look for a lot of the stuff you put out, even if they're different artists. Descender and Royal City, for instance, two totally different artists, but there's still a vibe about them, at least the style and the look that are very similar. Obviously, the stuff you've done yourself all looks the same. Is there kind of like a specific aesthetic that you are looking for in your books to kind of keep it?
No, I don't think so. I think what happens is everyone has tastes and everything. Everyone has kind of things they like and things they don't like. So obviously, I probably tend to. I'm drawn to artists that I like, obviously. So I must have some kind of shared thing about them that draws me to them. It's not something I consciously think about, but yeah, we all tend to like the same kind of things. So.
All right, I've taken up a whole bunch of your time.
Okay,
I guess the other anything new on the Underwater Welter movie, possibly?
Nothing right now. Hollywood is so slow compared to comics.
It's like that's a touchy subject.
No, not at all.
Creator at one point, they're like, I don't want to talk about.
Oh no, there's nothing bad. Yeah, no, it's very exciting. I had a great conversation with Ryan Gosling about it when he first optioned it, and he had a lot of passion for the project, and he really had his own vision for it, which I liked. He didn't want to just copy the comic book. He kind of had his own story he wanted to tell in that world, and I thought that was pretty cool. Because it's a really personal story for me, so it would be weird to see someone else kind of doing my story, and I think he kind of is bringing his own take to it, which is cool. But yeah, Hollywood moves so much slower than comics. It's like I can write and publish and hold in my hands a complete piece of work in the time that they take to like send one email about a contract. So it's like, yeah, who knows how long it'll take, but yeah.
You've done a lot of work with different shared universes. You've done work for DC, Marvel, and Valiant. When it comes to kind of working in someone else's, playground with characters, is there something that stands out to you that's kind of different between working with the three of them, with maybe just how it interacts or how you have to think through the characters?
Yeah, I mean, they're all different. They all have different personalities involved, different people working there, different way of doing things, I like Valiant because it's such a small world. So they only put out 8 books a month, and they only launched in like 2012. So it's a young universe and it's a small universe. So you can be a really big part of it by the nature of what it is, Like when I expand Bloodshot's mythology and create all the supporting cast and everything, it's like you're laying a foundation for that universe for years to come. It's not something that's been around for 80 years already. And then, but then the joy of Marvel and DC is that there are these icons that have been around for 80 years, and that you get to add to them. So they each kind of have their advantages, and they're all different. Yeah, I don't want to say anything negative about anyone, so I'll just leave it at that.
Well, so the reason I kind of asked is the thing that stands out to me with Valiant is that it's a shared universe. These characters have history, but each series is a volume unto itself. And while it helps to read the past stuff, you don't need to read the past stuff. And things are very much kind of a self-contained story with whatever volume. And while you might be able to read multiple series, you don't necessarily have to read multiple series. With maybe Marvel and DC from a reader, I feel like sometimes you're missing things if you don't read other series. It's not here's a volume and you can really enjoy that volume. You probably should read the volume before you should read the volume. I mean, going into kind of working that environment, like the Valiant environment, is kind of what I'm getting at. Is it a different approach than, let's say, than working with Justice League United, where you maybe had to think of 75 years from now, or Marvel kind of that similar way?
Yeah, that's exactly the draw of Valiant is how it's so contained, and
Is that a mandate of theirs? Is you think through?
No, I think it's Warren. It's all Warren Simons. He's such a great editor, and he's the perfect kind of editor who he hires the right person for the right character and lets them be themselves. And You know, when I did my first stuff for Warren, it was a mini-series called The Valiant that I did with Matt Kent. And I handed him my first couple scripts, and Warren he was the first sort of work-for-hire editor that I ever had, who kind of came to me and said, you know, I want this to be more like Essex County, more like Sweet Tooth. You know, don't write it like you're writing for DC. Write it like you're writing it for yourself. And, you know, he really pushed me to put myself into it more. And so I don't think there's any mandate for the universe. I think it's more of just getting the right people and letting them be themselves and encouraging them to be themselves, you know, which is really great.
All right, we're totally out of order on everything. With Black Hammer, this is the best thing of not using audio and actually transcribing this. With Black Hammer, you're obviously focused on the villains for at least the first spin-off. Is it, for you as a writer, like, there's got to be a fine line, right, of writing a villain. You don't necessarily want to glamorize them being a villain, but at the same time, you can't make them like so despicable that the people aren't going to enjoy reading it. For like you as a writer, is that something kind of on your mind that you have to think about, where you have to balance it?
Yeah. Well, my take on these villains for Sherlock, and I don't want to spoil the story, but my take on it is that these villains it's been 10 years since there's been any superheroes around, and they don't really have anything to do anymore. And they kind of don't have a purpose anymore. So the villains we see in Sherlock are not very villainous. They're kind of everyday guys and girls who kind of no longer have a focus or a purpose in life, and so they're not extremely villainous, as we'll find out. They're I think very relatable characters. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.